All right. So Proverbs chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Many people have questions about life, about how life works and how they should live and how they should make choices in life. For many Christians, oftentimes we wish that God would just directly guide us and answer, all the details of all the decisions that we have to make every day in our lives. Who should I marry? What career path should I take? How do I serve? Where should I serve in the church? And plenty of other mundane decisions. Sometimes, all these things, those types of questions sometimes have led Christians to despair and anxiety because they don't know how to choose, and they're waiting for God to answer basically in this clear and unmistakable sort of way. But guidance is not always this way. In fact, it is rarely that way even in the Bible. Rather, God requires wisdom from us in order to be able to live life well. What is wisdom? Simply stated, wisdom is the skill of life. Wisdom is the skill of life. It is the ability to discern and recognize circumstances and opportunities for righteousness. The Bible contrasts wisdom with folly, which includes, but is not limited to, being lacking in knowledge. But folly especially is the misappropriation and the misapplication of knowledge. Now, where do people usually go looking for wisdom? Generally, people tend to run to gurus. Maybe you've got some sort of calendar, and it's got the inspirational wise quotes of the day. Inspiration from the Dalai Lama or something like that. We'll go to our chicken soup for the soul, and we go to these outside sources and we look for some sort of insight into life. We look to people who have done life well, and what can they tell me about how to live mine? Is generally what we do. Christians, however, we have recognized that the book of Proverbs is a book about wisdom. So Christians, in a sense, we should go right to Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is one of 5 books that make up the wisdom literature in the Old Testament. The other books are the Psalms, Job, Ecclesiastes, and Songs of Solomon. Together, these make up the particular wisdom literature of the Old Testament, but the wisdom genre is sprinkled throughout the entire Bible. It's sprinkled throughout the entire Bible. So you can't just say that only wisdom is found in those 5 books. That is, you'll find in different places in the prophets, they'll use wisdom. In the Gospels, there's wisdom in there. James in the New Testament is considered to be the wisdom book of the New Testament. Wisdom is something that we all need. But in the Bible, it's also something that is required. We are required to be wise because we have to choose from many paths and choices that life has to offer. We have to make decisions. You can't just stay stuck at the fork in the road. You have to move. You have to pick. You have to choose something. Wisdom is a tool that is required for making righteous choices that reflect the will of God in the direction of our lives. Hence, wisdom, though it is described as a gift, it is also a task. It is also a duty that is required. It is something that we are to search for. It's something that we're to work for, and something even that we are to seek every single day. The Bible places obtaining wisdom as an imperative. It is a command to be wise, to obtain wisdom. So, in this study, what we're going to do first is we're going to examine the structure of the book of Proverbs and make some observations that will hopefully help you to understand the nature of the book and the nature of biblical wisdom. If you got to read all of Proverbs before, hopefully this will make sense. If you've never read all of Proverbs straight through, this will still help you to make some sense. So when you do read it, you'll be able to kind of structure it out and follow along. Because the interesting thing about Proverbs is that it's not like the other books. The other books are stories; they're narrative for the most part in the Old Testament. This one's different. There's a lot of different sayings that a lot of times can be, and for all practical purposes, they don't appear to be connected, and so Proverbs comes across as a little bit different. Okay, so we'll look at the structure first. Secondly, we'll see the choices for wisdom and folly on the path of life that Proverbs presents and what those mean to us. And finally, the problem of wisdom and God's wisdom in response to our folly. So, let's begin. Keys to Proverbs. Okay, Proverbs by far, again, it is one of the easiest books in the entire Bible to read. One of the easiest books. Okay, the reason Proverbs can be so easy to read or to be a favorite of a lot of people is because of its seeming disconnect with redemptive history. Okay, that is, there doesn't appear to be a plot line. There's no narrative that I have to pay attention to. Okay, what are the main characters in one sense, and where's the conflict, where's the rising action, where's the conflict resolution and all that kind of stuff. You don't really find that in Proverbs. You don't have to pay attention to it so much. Okay, the majority of the book, that is chapters 10 through 31, it consists of short wisdom sayings. Okay, and so in that sense, there's no mental work that is required. Okay, you don't have to follow the narrative or the plot line. You can just read an individual proverb, and they're like these little nuggets that are in there. And as long as you pick out a nugget, you've got something in your hand to work with. Most of the time, we approach the Proverbs as sort of quick fixes to life, okay, or as if they are rules to live by or commandments to be obeyed. Okay. Now, allow me a few quick observations about this. Okay. First, Proverbs are not dogmatic rules or laws that infallibly come to pass. Okay? Proverbs are not dogmatic rules or laws that infallibly come to pass. Rather, the sayings contained therein are based on observations about life. They are based on observations about life. That is to say, the way the Proverbs were written were based on someone's life experiences. In this way, a proverb expresses an insight. It expresses an observation or advice that has been popularly accepted as general truth. The Proverbs of the Bible, they have much in common with wisdom literature from other cultures of the time. Solomon was not the first of the wise men of the world to seek wisdom. There were others in 1 Kings 4, 29 through 34. When it says, God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and the breadth of mind like the sand of the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and the wisdom of Egypt. So the Bible here acknowledges that there is wisdom in these other cultures. There was wisdom in the East, and there was wisdom in Egypt. It goes on to say, it says, for he was wiser than all other men, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman. I always want to say that was He-Man. It's in the cartoon, but the Hebrew won't let me say it that way. Calcol, Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop, etc., etc., etc. And the people of all the nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. But Solomon was not the first to dabble in wisdom. He was not the first to dabble in wisdom. So clearly there were others who were also asking the questions about life. There was others in other cultures who were delving into the mysteries of life and trying to gain the upper hand in it. It seems pretty clear to scholars now that Solomon was aware of the wisdom of other cultures as well, including Egypt. Many of the proverbs, in fact, that he lists in Proverbs, I believe his Proverbs are 10 through 27 or 10 through 28 that are specifically assigned to Solomon. But a lot of those Proverbs are almost word for word the same as those found in the writings of Egyptian wisdom of the time that have been discovered. Okay. You'll also note at the near the end of the book, there are some sayings that are attributed to a fellow by the name of Agar. Okay, that's chapter 30, and also King Lemuel, chapter 31. Okay, so these sayings, and so here, this will be the second observation. The content was not unique. Okay, the content was not necessarily unique. Okay, these sayings and these wisdom, it was not something that was unique to Israel. Why? Because everybody lived in God's world. Everybody lived in God's world, and God's world is made by one God, one person who's laid the laws down and who pretty much governs how life works. Because all lived in God's world and in God's economy, all were able to come to some of the conclusions about life. Okay, they were true in every culture. I mean, even today we have proverbs in America. Okay, that they say them in different ways in other culture, but they want to say the exact same things. Okay, why? Because one God made everything, and one God's rule and economy runs everything too. Okay, so the content was not unique. Now, this leads to our third observation about reading and understanding Proverbs, and that is this: Proverbs are not always true. This is a big one when you read Proverbs. Proverbs are not always true. Now, what do I mean by that before somebody says, uh-oh, this guy's going off into heresy? What do I mean by that? Now, going back to the first principle here, okay? A proverb is not a law book. Proverbs was not written as a law book. It's quite common for people to read the Proverbs as, quote-unquote, Bible promises or things to live by. But the Proverbs themselves were never meant to be read in such a manner or lived out as law. Rather, the wisdom of the Proverbs is in understanding when and to whom they are to be applied to. Okay? The wisdom of Proverbs is understanding when and to whom they are to be applied to. Listen to Old Testament scholar Trimper Longman III. He said this. He said, "Indeed, to read a proverb as if it were always true in every circumstance is to commit a serious error. We call it the error of genre misidentification. The proverb form, no matter the cultural background, presupposes the right circumstance for its proper application." Okay, so let me offer a few examples to illustrate what I mean. In Proverbs 26, okay, Proverbs 26 verses 4 and 5, you read this. It says, "Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself." And then the next proverb, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." Now, if the book of Proverbs is to be taken as a law or as a code of conduct to live by, then one must confess that there appears here to be an explicit contradiction of prescribed behavior. Because one is telling you, okay, don't answer the fool, and then the very next verse, answer the fool. Okay, so does everybody see that apparent contradiction if it's read in a law type of fashion? But when understood correctly, there is no contradiction here. Okay, the point is that it takes wisdom to apply the Proverbs. It takes wisdom to apply the Proverbs. The wisdom is not the saying by itself. It's the saying correctly applied. It is the saying correctly applied. In regards to these two Proverbs, okay, taken collectively, we would have to say that there is a right time to answer a person so that they are not misled to thinking that they are God's gift to the intellectual world. Okay, that is, that they learn some humility. Okay, that they learn some humility. But then there are some times, and with some people, that you don't even want to attempt to correct, because once you try to get into an argument with them, you're pretty much going to be dragged down into the same foolishness, and you end up appearing foolish with them as well. So, the true wisdom is not the saying by itself. It's the correct application of the proverb. It is the correct application of the proverb. That is the skill of life. As John Piper argued in his book, Think, wisdom requires our mental efforts. Another example that the Proverbs alone are not and ever always true is the example of Job. And we covered this when we did our sermon on Job. But Job, he's described as one who is blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Okay? Now in Proverbs 22:4, we read this. It says, "The reward for humility and the fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life." Now, it would seem to be the case, as Job's friend concluded, that Job's wealth and honor were because he feared the Lord. But when they were taken away, they automatically assumed that he must have stopped fearing the Lord and had sinned in something, which is why they kept calling him to repentance. They were taking a general truth, okay, in a sense, let's say this general truth of Proverbs 22:4. They were taking that and they were misapplying it to Job's situation, thus proving that they were fools because they didn't have the knowledge that us, the readers, were given at the beginning of the narrative that takes place between Satan and the Lord. Now, both Job and Ecclesiastes, they serve as a sort of balance to the book of Proverbs, okay, concerning the connection between material blessing and obedience to God. Because as you read Proverbs, you read things like Proverbs 22:4, that if you're good and if you obey, God will give you riches and health and wealth and all that kind of stuff. But when you look at life, that's not always true. That's not always true. And in fact, in Psalm 73, Asaph, he's crying out to God. He's like, "God, I don't get it. I don't get it. I go to church. I do your will. I offer the sacrifices. And here I am. I'm the one who feels like I'm not making it in life. I feel like the one who's being ousted in everything. And I look at the wicked, and their bulls always, they're always fertile. Their fields are growing. They're fat. They're sleek. They look good. They're hot, and I'm not. And what's going on here? What's going on? And so there's these balances that come out from those other wisdom books, that basically say that we cannot reduce these proverbs, okay, and especially in Proverbs, to mechanical laws. They can't be reduced, and they more specifically, they cannot reduce God to this machine. Okay, they can't reduce God to this machine or the universe to mechanized laws. They basically say that, well, if you do X, then God will give you Y. But if you don't do X, or if you do A instead, then God will give you Z or B. I hope everybody followed along with that algebra there. Okay? But Ecclesiastes and Job, they balance out the tendency to elevate proverbial wisdom to laws or formulas just to get things from God. And if you haven't read Ecclesiastes already, it's a very dim look of life, because you can be righteous and it's like, everything will still go wrong for you. Doesn't matter if you're the righteous or not. And that's one of the mysteries, in a sense, of the righteous, of God's people, is that they're the ones that seem to be suffering the most in life. God's people are the ones who seem to be suffering the most in God's world, and the wicked are the ones who seem to be getting away with everything. Okay? So, these principles should always be kept in mind when reading the proverbial sayings. Okay? The sayings by themselves, while generally true, okay, are not true for everyone in all circumstances. The wisdom that Proverbs attempts to get across is to know when and to know how and to whom even to apply these truths to. So in essence, the wisdom is, how do I take the general rule, the general observation, and apply it correctly to a specific situation in life. And so this is, in a sense, you can see the wisdom. Well, how do I know? I know that marriage is a good thing, and if I want it, but how do I know who? I know working is a good thing, that God has ordained, but what line of work should I do? I know that God tells me that I should serve Him and I should serve His church, but where do I serve? And so you take these general truths, and wisdom is knowing how to guide or how to be guided into where God wants you. Basically, how to make a righteous choice, how to make the right choice. Okay? So, with that being said, let's delve into the book itself. All right? So, the book of Proverbs. All right? The beginning of the book sets out its purpose, which is what we read. It says, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing. This is chapter 1, verse 1 through 7. In righteousness, in justice and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and direction to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. Now, the first stated purpose is to teach wisdom. Okay? Wisdom, as we've already noted, it's the skill of living. It's the skill of life. It's the skill to be able to handle life in whatever situation one finds himself in. Again, Tremper Longman III says, he says that it is practical knowledge that helps one know how to act and how to speak even in different situations. Wisdom entails the ability to avoid problems, the skill to handle them when they present themselves. Wisdom also includes the ability to interpret others' speech and writing in order to react correctly to what they are saying to us. So in a sense, there's the ability to discern what's really going on in a situation, to be able to see past fluff in one sense and get to a root of an issue. That's part of what wisdom is. Now, we should not confuse wisdom with mere knowledge. While wisdom includes and makes use of truth and knowledge, knowledge itself does not constitute wisdom. Okay? Knowledge itself does not constitute wisdom. Hence, it has to be said that having a high IQ is not what makes you wise. Okay? It's not what makes you wise, simply being book smart or things in that sort of way. That's not necessarily wisdom. Wisdom is portrayed as both a gift and a duty. Proverbs 2:6 says that the Lord gives wisdom. Okay, so it's his gift. The Lord gives it. Okay, but here in the introduction we just read that it is our duty to know it. It's our duty to receive it. It's our duty to seek it and to increase in it. And so that's something that has to be kept in mind. Again, you get that balance. It's something that God alone can give, but also something that God requires of us, something that he holds us responsible for. Now, as a whole, the book is written with certain kinds of people in mind as well. Okay? First, there is the simple, mentioned in chapter 1, verse 4. Okay? There is the simple. The simple, they are the unformed in their thinking. Okay? They are the unformed in their thinking. They are the uninformed. Okay? They are the immature, but they are teachable. Okay? In a sense, they're the young in thought. Okay? So don't think unformed or uninformed means like, they're way out there in left field or something like that. No, they're in a sense they're pliable in their thinking. They're still in a position in life where they're young enough that they can be shaped and molded in how they think, and so they're teachable. That's what's important to know about the simple. They are teachable. Okay. The book of Proverbs then is given to help the simple to develop and to mature in their thinking. It's meant as a guide to help them form the correct way to think. Okay, so that's one, the simple. Secondly, it is written for the wise to help them increase in their learning of wisdom. We see that in 1:5. And to help further develop their skill in wisdom. Okay, the wise are also teachable. The wise are also teachable. Okay, but we must notice that specifically, this book is written from the perspective of a father to his son. You see that in Proverbs 1:8. And that's important when reading this book, okay? Because if you read at least chapters 1 through 9, you see that it's directed toward this young male. It's directed toward a son, okay? And so that also helps to make sense of one of the important metaphors in the book that we'll get to in just a moment, okay? Now, not included in the target audience is the fool. The fool is the one who rejects knowledge, who rejects instruction in righteousness, justice, and equity. The fool is unteachable. The fool is unteachable. Now, it's not that Proverbs has nothing to say about fools, okay? It just doesn't address itself to them, because the fool necessarily excludes himself from learning and wisdom. The fool necessarily excludes himself. The fool is elsewhere described as the one who says in his heart, "There is no God." Listen to the full description of a fool in Psalm 14. Psalm 14, beginning in verse 1 through verse 4, it says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven and on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. They have no knowledge. All the evildoers who eat up my people as they eat bread, and they do not call upon the Lord. Now, Proverbs says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Okay? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. When the fool says that there is no God, they can't even begin to delve into knowledge or even into wisdom, because they're missing this fundamental element. Now, the fear of the Lord, okay, is not this shaking in your boots kind of fear. Okay, it's not the fear that you get from watching Paranormal Activity. You guys know what I'm talking about, huh? Okay, rather, fear, okay, fear is described as an idea that is so gripping that it controls you. Okay? Fear is an idea that's so gripping that it controls you. Okay? For instance, the fear of man is to be controlled by the opinions and the acceptance or rejection of people so that you do things, there's the control, because other people are controlling your thoughts and therefore controlling your actions. Conversely, the fear of the Lord is that the idea of the covenant God so grips your mind that you are controlled by His power, by His presence, and His reality in your life. That is what it means, the fear of the Lord. To be so aware of God that you are controlled by His power, by His presence, and by the reality of who He is. Hence, as theologian Graham Goldsworthy says, he says, this concept of fear as reverence for God and His covenant means trust and obedience toward the one who has shown His faithfulness to His chosen people. So in a sense, what Goldsworthy is kind of arguing for is that to fear the Lord is, first of all, to believe in the Lord. To believe in the Lord. And I had to get rid of a big old section here, but in a sense, what Proverbs would kind of be saying too is that to have real, genuine knowledge, it has to be grounded in God. You cannot have knowledge based on philosophical systems that exclude God. They don't hold. They philosophically do not hold. And I didn't want to detail that because the sermon was long enough as it is, but that's what Proverbs is really saying here. If you're going to have any knowledge, if you're going to start with knowledge, first of all, you have to understand that it comes from God. It comes from the God who created all things, including the knowledge that we have to believe. God created all of that. Everything has to start with God. True wisdom begins with a very specific view about God. Okay, it's not just this general theism, okay, but rather it is a belief in the covenant God of the Bible. And the Bible is very specific about that. It says the fear of the Lord, and it's using the covenant name for God there, Yahweh. In your Bible, it's probably in all caps. Lord is in all caps there because it's using God's covenant name there. Okay? Wisdom cannot start with a lie. Wisdom cannot start with a lie. If God does exist, then all truth is God's truth. All wisdom is God's wisdom, and all knowledge is God's knowledge. Apart from this God, the God of the Bible, there is no knowledge. There is no knowledge. The fear of the Lord, the fear of Yahweh, the covenant God of the Bible, is the beginning of knowledge. It is a profound statement about knowledge. If anybody here has ever taken a philosophy course, and if you've gone through epistemology, the study of knowledge, this is a very profound statement that the Bible is making about that. A very profound statement. The one who does not believe in this God necessarily excludes himself from finding true wisdom. And as a philosophy minor myself, the history of philosophy is proof of that. Philosophy has finally reached its end in postmodernism. There is no new philosophy. You start from the pre-Socratics and everybody else, and they've been asking all these questions, and they've asked the same questions. And you know what? They finally come to this conclusion that there is no answers. Make up your own truth. Do whatever you want. There's no ultimate truth. Make up your own story. Bam, philosophy. We're done. Close pass. That's it. That's the end of philosophy. That's the end of philosophy. It's already at the end. There is no knowledge apart from God. And philosophy, human philosophy, is that attempt to try to find knowledge, to try to find wisdom. Philosophy means love of wisdom, philosophia. Okay, it's been that attempt to gain knowledge and to gain wisdom apart from God, and it's proven futile. No philosopher has ever solved the mysteries of life. Ever. Ever. They've never come to him. The one who does not believe in this God necessarily excludes himself from finding true wisdom. Fools despise wisdom and instruction, says the Proverbs. They don't want it. They don't want to hear truth. They don't care for it. They're the kind of people who don't care if what they believe or do is based on the reality of God or in truth. Fools, they're ones who do, in a sense, out of convenience for themselves. Okay, you can think of pragmatism. Who cares if it's true? It works. I'm just going to do it because it works. It's expedient. Okay, and it works for me. They're the ones who don't care if they can ground what they believe and do in a coherent system of truth. Okay, or a worldview. Okay, like take naturalistic materialism. Okay, the evolutionistic worldview. You know, if evolution is true, survival of the fittest, violence is primary. Violence is just an expression of power. It's just an expression of power. When somebody goes into a movie theater, and you know, forgive me for being so crass about it, but when somebody goes into a movie theater, starts spraying people with a gun, that's an expression of power. That's the person showing themselves to be fit to survive, and everybody else in that audience no. In a naturalistic, materialistic worldview, that is an expression of power, and that should be considered good. But they can't live that way. They know it, and they have to call it wrong, but they have no basis for calling it wrong. They have no basis for calling it wrong. You can't. There's no way to do it. And you can't say, well, it's in nature. It's like, well, you've got animals that kill their prey after mating with them. Are we going to call that right too? You can't. You cannot ground, truths of morality and certain aspects of knowledge. You cannot ground them in nature. You cannot do it. There's no knowledge there. And the fools, they don't care about that. For them, it's about the moment. It's about the moment. So wisdom is a problem for the fool. Wisdom is a problem for the fool. But the simple and the wise, and especially the son, and again, we're going to come back to that metaphor a lot in there, but the son, they are presented in Proverbs with choices on their path or on their walk. Chapters 1 through 9, they follow an interesting metaphor of two women who are calling out to the sun, okay, day and night, to turn him to their way. Okay, they are woman wisdom and woman folly. Okay, woman wisdom, she's compared to the kind of girl that you marry and have a long-lasting relationship with. Okay, but woman folly, she's compared to the adulterous woman. She's compared to the prostitute, who, while she may give you a quick thrill, she has nothing but heartache and disaster at the end. So let's go to chapter 9, and let's get a summative idea of who these two women are. This is one of the controlling themes in Proverbs. Okay, so first there's woman wisdom. Okay, woman wisdom in Proverbs 9 verses 1 through 12. This summarizes her plea, basically, to this son as he's walking through town. And Proverbs, it also mentions a lot about the path. Okay, the path, life. Okay, and so here's Proverbs 9 1 through 12. It says, "Wisdom," this is Lady Wisdom, "has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine that I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live, and walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to the wise man, and he will be wiser still. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself, but if you scoff, you alone will bear it." Now, I want to be clear, and I hope it comes out when you read Proverbs this way, that this is not describing a literal woman. Okay? Rather, this woman is presented as a personification of wisdom. Okay? But as we are going to see, she is also a personification for God himself. Notice that in verse 3 that her house is located in the highest places in town. Okay, now in ancient Near Eastern cultures, the temples and the places of worship were located at the highest points of the cities because in that sense, in their thinking, they were closer to heaven. If there was no high place, then it was common for people to build what would have been called ziggurats. Okay, these were pyramid-like looking structures or towers. If you remember from Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. If you remember Jacob's ladder, okay, it essentially was a ziggurat. It was the stepped pyramid that connected heaven and earth. Okay, that was the vision that he had. Okay, identifying woman wisdom's home in the high places of the city is to say that she was being identified with God. Again, theologian Tremper Longman, he said that the location of her house makes clear that woman wisdom stands for God. She is a poetic personification of God's wisdom and represents God as a part for the whole, a synecdoche. Okay? Thus, the figure of woman wisdom fits with a long list of other metaphors for God's relationship with his people, including God as warrior, God as shepherd, God as father, God as spouse, God as king, and more. Woman wisdom, she gives out her call to the simple. Okay, she calls out to the people who are untaught in a sense, but who are teachable, and she's telling them, "Come with me." Okay, she's saying, "Come with me." The imagery of animals slaughtered and the prepared meal is one of prudence. Okay, one of strength, of riches and honor, that is hers. What she has to offer is life. She says, leave your simple ways. And this is Proverbs 3:16. Leave your simple ways and live. Live. Okay? Days added to your life. Years multiplied. Proverbs 3:16. Again, that says, long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. And Proverbs 3:18 says that she is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. To those who hold fast to her are called blessed. So, woman wisdom, she clearly has a lot to offer. She has the most to offer. She has life to offer. In being a personification for God's wisdom and God himself, she rightly directs her listeners that true wisdom and knowledge begin with the fear of the Lord. Proverbs 9:10, it says there, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Wisdom comes from God. It's God's gift. And again, it's our duty to seek it. Proverbs 2, verses 3 through 7. It says, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Now, following woman wisdom is also akin to remaining faithful to one's wife in marriage. So if you're wondering, well, why does Proverbs start talking about the son and woman wisdom, and then bam, all of a sudden, boom, you're in these marriage contexts, and warnings of adultery and stuff like that. You've got to follow this metaphor of woman wisdom. Again, woman wisdom is presented as the kind of girl you go home, you take home and marry. Okay, she's presented as that kind of gal. Okay. Now, again, that helps to make sense of the topic shifts of marriage and like, wait, what? I'm going to marriage and then woman wisdom. Okay, following the metaphor, meaning earlier, woman wisdom, she represents the one true God of the Bible. Hence, the new metaphor of marriage that's introduced is about remaining faithful to the one true God of the covenant and not seeking satisfaction outside of him and outside of the covenant. Okay, that is the meaning of the metaphor. Okay, yes, it does have things to say about marriage, those of you that are looking for it in there. But the primary thing that it's trying to get across is that in staying faithful to woman wisdom, okay, it's like staying faithful in marriage, which ultimately means staying faithful to God. Staying faithful to the God of the covenant. But then, there is woman folly. There is woman folly, and she is the opposite of woman wisdom. Listen to the description of her, going back to Proverbs 9. It says, the woman folly is loud. She is seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way, Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And she says to the one who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Now, if woman wisdom is the personification of the wisdom of the true God and points to God himself, then woman folly is the personification of false gods, of idols that tempt people off the path of life. Again, Tremper Longman, he said that she too represents something other than herself. Not the true God, but the idols, the false gods and goddesses that tempted Israel away from Yahweh. Now, not necessarily any particular deity, okay? She was just there were certain idols, certain religions that were a snare to Israel. Baalism was one, huge. The Asherahs were also another one, okay? But notice this lady, she's also placed herself in the high places of town because she is associating herself with worship. She wants to be worshipped as the one true God. She wants to sit in the place of God. But she's not like wisdom in very significant ways. Whereas wisdom will call out to people on their path, okay, a woman wisdom will not impose herself on anyone. Okay? She will not impose herself on anyone. In fact, in the end of the description of her, she will not even attempt to offer herself to scoffers. Woman wisdom is willing to let people do what they want to do. She's willing to let them go. In a sense, if they want to have nothing to do with her, woman wisdom is okay in saying, okay, you're a scoffer. There's no hope for you. There you go. Okay, but woman folly, on the other hand, she is seductive. She's described as seductive. Okay, she is enticing. Seduction is usually temptation to the wrong. Okay, we don't say, I was seduced into giving that homeless guy shelter. We don't use the word that way. Okay? We use the word seduction because it's usually a temptation to something wrong. Okay? Woman folly, she's aggressive. She's imposing. Okay? She calls to the simple and to those who lack sense. So she sees them as prey. She sees them as prey versus woman wisdom and says, I'm giving you the opportunity for life. I'm giving you the opportunity to have years added to you, to have your years multiplied. Woman folly, she's inviting these men in for a meal, even as woman wisdom, but notice that her meal is stolen water. It's stolen water. Bread in secret. Now these images go back to Proverbs 5:15, in which the son is told to drink water from his own cistern, which was a metaphor for remaining faithful in marriage and not committing adultery or getting water from another well. Okay, that's where that imagery goes back to. In essence, woman folly is calling this man this son who's married, okay, she's calling him to adultery. She's calling him to abandon the one true God. She's calling him to abandon covenant faithfulness. The simple and the ignorant, they're being drawn into their death. They don't know it, okay? And again, the sexual overtones of stolen water should be clear, okay? But they're used to show that choosing an idol is like committing adultery against the God of the covenant. That's imagery that's all throughout the Old Testament. In Hosea especially, God accuses Israel of playing the whore. Same thing that you get in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah. Because God considers Israel married to himself. So this is powerful imagery. The Bible actually uses the imagery of sin, especially the sin of idolatry, as likened to committing adultery against the Lord. The strongest places, again, it's in the book of Hosea, in which God commands Hosea to marry an adulterous woman, a wife of whoredom, because the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. That's Hosea 1:2. Okay, and we, ask yourself, how do you think of your sin? How do you think of your sin? How do we think about the life choices that we make? Not many of us think of, wrong choices that we make as adultery. We're willing to say, well, I didn't fill out the checklist today. I left something undone. Oh, well, but when you look at the imagery, when we turn to the idols, when we don't choose the right path, Proverbs is willing to call that adultery. And it's saying that we're going and we're eating stolen water. We're having our bread in secret. If you've ever been in a relationship, you know that exclusivity, commitment, and loyalty are always expected and even demanded. We demand them. We demand it from our partners, and they demand it from us. God's standards are no less. But time after time, we go after the idols. We go after other lovers. We go after things that we think are right in a man's eyes. But in the end, they lead only to death. Proverbs 14:12. And we worship and we serve these idols. And as we do, listen to what Proverbs says about the characteristics that describe a fool throughout Proverbs. Angry and quick-tempered. If you've ever harnessed or harbored a secret sin in your heart, you know that when somebody confronts it, you get angry. You get angry. Look at David. When Nathan confronted him, he initially got angry. He got angry. He got all upset. And that man needs to die. Luckily when he was told, you're that man, he was wise enough to repent. But sometimes that's not always the case. We read about some of the kings. I forget the name of the king, but one king, when he was confronted with his sin, he had the priest shut up and put in prison. And he had him killed. He was angry when he was confronted with his sin. They enjoy quarrels and fights. They're wise in their own assessment of themselves. And again, if we're in sin, it's easy for us to think sometimes, how slick am I? I'm getting away with it. How slick am I? I'll take care of this. I know how I'll handle this. I'll just go to church a little extra. You know what? I'll show up early, and that way I can get the good seat, and I can listen from the best seat. We reason with ourselves in all these different ways. We become wise in our own eyes about the ways that we're going to handle or keep covering up our sin. They refuse the advice of others. It's Proverbs 28:26. I didn't give you the other Proverbs. For angry and quick-tempered, that's Proverbs 14:17. Enjoying quarrels and fights, that's Proverbs 20, verse 3. Wise in their own assessment, that's Proverbs 12:15. And now Proverbs 28:26. They refuse advice from others. Again, why? Why do we refuse advice from others? Because we're wise in our own eyes. I don't need anybody else. I don't need a counselor. I don't need anybody. I can do it myself. But also, the fool lacks self-control, but especially in their words. Especially in controlling their words. Proverbs 10:14. Proverbs 17:28 also. So once a person settles, in a sense, on a lover for their soul that is not God, in a sense, when you put all these characteristics together, okay, they'll do anything to keep that thing. And when it is threatened, especially when it's threatened by the one true God, these are when the traits come out. When the idol is confronted, these are when all these traits will come out. We see it whenever one who is leaving foolishness, again, when they're called out on their sinfulness. When they're called out on it, these things will come up. Nothing makes us angry like someone calling us a sinner or telling us that we are wrong, especially if it's about our idol. Especially if it's about something that we are building our lives upon, that we're identifying ourselves with. Why? Because stolen water is sweet. And bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But woman folly, idolatry, it has nothing but death in store for the one who turns to her. Idolatry has nothing to offer but spiritual death. Proverbs 19:3 says that folly leads to ruin. So nothing but death awaits the fool and the scoffer. Now, our lack of wisdom. The Bible, in a not so subtle way, calls each and every one of us fools. Okay? Many people don't like to see themselves as the fool, especially in Proverbs. Again, we want to read Proverbs and think, I'm the wise man reading Proverbs. If we're a little moderate with ourselves, I'm the simple one and I'm here to gain some wisdom. Okay, but most of the time we plug ourselves in as we're the wise man reading Proverbs. But the Bible calls us fools. The Bible calls each and every one of us fools. Okay, and we don't want to be that guy in Proverbs. We hate being that guy because of all the things that it says. Okay, but again, our opinions of ourselves are too high if we say that we are not. In fact, we demonstrate our foolishness in thinking ourselves wise by our own assessments. Remember that wisdom is instruction in righteousness in Proverbs 1:3. The Bible assesses us all as fools, in particular in Romans chapter 1, in that we have all become foolish, and we have all exchanged the glory and the worship of the one true God for the foolishness of idols. Listen to Proverbs 1:21 through 23. It says, "For although they knew God, they did not give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things." Do you see what Paul is saying here? He's saying in regards to wisdom, in regards to what Proverbs has to say about the path, Paul is saying that every human has turned toward woman folly. Every single human being has universally turned toward human folly. Again, if you read that, you catch the references to Proverbs 12:15 and Proverbs 28:6. Okay, they claim to be wise in their own eyes, but instead, in them or in us, is fulfilled the proverb that those who claim to be wise in their own eyes, in fact, are fools, and they do foolish things like worship things that aren't God as God. Moreover, Proverbs 16:12, it speaks about the one who thinks themselves wise in their own eyes as becoming hardened beyond hope. In fact, if you follow Romans 1 to the end of the chapter, you see them being hardened in their sin as they're handed over to more and more sin. In Romans 3, chapter 10, verses 12, this is explicit about the fool. If you remember Psalm 14, the description of the fool, listen to Romans 3, and this is Paul applying it to Jew and Gentile. Listen, he says, "As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good. No, not even one." Paul is quoting and applying Psalm 14, verses 1 through 3, which describes the fool who has said in his heart, "No God." Okay? He's applied that to every single person, both Jew and Gentile alike. Okay? Now, that phrase, "no God," that's not atheism. Okay? There were no atheists back then. Everybody worshipped a God. Okay? There were no intellectual atheists back then. Okay? Rather, the no God, okay, was a way of living without God in one's thinking. Okay? It is living life as if God didn't matter. As if what God said was not important. Now, it should be obvious that Paul, he's apostolically showing that we're all that fool of Psalm 14. We are all that fool. That means we are also the fool of Proverbs. That is us. In the New Testament, the wisdom motif does not go away. Wisdom is still required of us, and we are still required to make a choice for wisdom or folly on the path. But instead of woman wisdom, it's Jesus who now makes the call for wisdom. Listen to his prayer in Matthew 11. This is Matthew 11, verses 25 through 30. He's just refuted the wisdom of those who were wise in their own thinking, the Pharisees, okay, and he exalts those instead who come to him, even as woman wisdom called out to those on the path to come to her. This is Jesus. He says, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding." That is, we should understand they're the ones who claim to be wise in their own eyes, okay, "and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And let me ask you, did you hear the call of woman wisdom in the words of Jesus there? Did you hear it? Come to me. That's what woman wisdom was saying. Come to me. The simple. Come to me. Do you hear wisdom? Come. Jesus calls out to the simple, that is to the childlike, the teachable, the ones who will receive his words. Jesus, like Lady Wisdom, he rejects the scoffers. He rejects the Pharisees. They're out. They're out of the kingdom. The Pharisees, the scribes, the teachers of the law, who were all wise in their own ways, blinded by their own pride. Again, listen to Jesus in Matthew 7. Matthew 7, 24 through 27. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it has been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Do you hear Proverbs 13:3? Proverbs 13:3, whoever despises the word brings destruction on himself, but he who reveres the commandment will be rewarded. Jesus is still calling us to make the choice of the path. Will we be the wise man, or will we be the foolish person? You see, Jesus, he is the great wisdom teacher. Jesus is the one who is instructed in the ways of wisdom. Jesus is the one who calls out to us himself that if we would seek wisdom, it is to him that we must go. It is to Jesus that we must go. He is the possessor of wisdom. Moreover, in Colossians 2:3, it says that in Christ, it is in him, are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. In him are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. And I would suggest that Jesus is the wise son of Proverbs. He is the wise son of Proverbs who makes his father glad, according to Proverbs 10:1. In Luke 2, verse 52, it reveals that as Jesus was growing up, that he grew in wisdom. Jesus grew in wisdom. When Jesus was old enough, the Father said of him, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And Jesus taught with such wisdom that he left his audiences saying, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works?" Matthew 13:54. Jesus is wisdom. Jesus is wisdom. But we can see that wisdom is still our duty. We're still called to choose between the path. Death still looms over the fools of the world. Death still comes to those who consider themselves wise in their own eyes. So the question then is first tonight, and I think Proverbs has to kind of create the question, is how do us fools become wise? How can we become wise? Is it by following the commands of Christ now? Well, again, if that were the case, then think about the Sermon on the Mount and how Jesus actually, he raised the standards. Okay? And he brought out the true meaning of the laws of the Old Testament, that they're not just simply what we do on the outside, but what we do on the inside as well. Jesus said, it's not enough to just not murder. You also need to not hate. It's not enough to just stay away from adultery. You also have to stay away from lust. If wisdom is, okay, let me follow what Jesus said, Jesus came to say also too, you can't do it. You can't follow the law. You can't be perfect. And when you try, that's you thinking that you're wise in your own eyes. That's you thinking that you're good enough to be able to do all of that. The standards for wisdom have been raised. Those have been raised as well in the coming of Christ. And the metaphor of woman wisdom, in a sense, it's gone now. Now it's replaced by the full meaning, Jesus. The wisdom of God ultimately will point us to the cross of Christ. Listen to the Apostle Paul. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 1. It says, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom. It pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand a sign, and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles, but to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. That is, I trust none of us, well, I mean, maybe, but for the most part, none of us here are geniuses. None of us here are geniuses. None of us are wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. And I'll ask you, did you catch it? Did you catch it? Did you catch the gospel in there? Jesus Christ, he has become for us, in our place, wisdom. Jesus is our wisdom. Jesus lived out the life of wisdom for all who would trust in him. He was for us the son or the daughter that we all should have been, receiving and taking in the instruction of our Heavenly Father. The wisdom of God was fully displayed on the cross. It was there on the cross that Jesus Christ, he took the penalty that was prescribed for the fools. He took the penalty that is prescribed for the unwise. He took the penalty that the mocker or that the scoffer is prescribed to get in Proverbs. On the cross, Jesus Christ, he was taking the beating that we deserved. He was the one being mocked, even as wisdom is mocked by fools. The wisdom of the world, that is those wise in their own eyes, their best wisdom was to laugh at that. It was to scorn at Jesus. But Jesus' wisdom was to keep silent before these fools and mockers. The wisdom of God and the wisdom of the world, of woman folly, these are complete opposites. The world sought salvation through power, and even today the world, people look to military might and power for salvation, but God's wisdom was salvation through death. My friend, the wisdom that you seek, it's not in New Age gurus. It's not found in inspirational books. It's not found in modern philosophy. The wisdom that you need for life is found in Christ. In light of Christ, we also have to understand that the fear of the Lord means to believe the gospel. It means to believe the gospel. Jesus is the doorway to wisdom, and that wisdom begins at the cross. The wisdom of God on full display. That is where wisdom leads us. At the cross, we see ourselves and we see our own wisdom condemned. Wisdom is a characteristic of the person who is rightly related to God. Jesus came to be the truly God-related man for us, and therefore he is wisdom for us. The way we relate to Jesus is ultimately the way that we relate to God. In the Old Testament, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but in light of Christ, again, the fear of the Lord must be understood ultimately as belief in the gospel. And so in conclusion, the same life choices, they're before us every day. Christian or not, the life choices are still there. Woman wisdom, woman folly. The true God or idols. Jesus Christ or nothing at all. Will we believe in the gospel? The wisdom of God displayed on the cross? Jesus as the incarnation of the wisdom of God? Jesus as wisdom for us? Or will we foolishly seek to be wise in our own eyes? And so again, it's to Jesus that we go for wisdom. 2 Timothy 3:15, it says that the scriptures are able to make us wise for salvation, because they are the very words of God about his Son. Scoffers will turn away from this. But if you are simple, if you want wisdom, we go to Christ. And we hear him say to us, "Come to me, and I will give you rest." Amen.